Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is the last panel for our conference already. It went very fast, I have to say, and I'm sure that a lot of us could have spent at least one more day here talking about general aviation. And basically, the role of this panel is to take into account the discussions that we had in the last 2 days and share the vision of policymakers on the future and the vision for what we like to call the roadmap 2.0. But we'll see if we have enough material to make a roadmap. I'm sure we do. So basically, I'm not going to repeat everything which was said before. We looked at first how much we delivered on the first roadmap, how many tasks we still have to perform. And you remember from Baudouin's slide, what was the color? The red colors. Just a few things. Not that difficult to implement anyway, so it's going to be done very easily. We talked a lot, including today, on new technologies. Modern aircraft. We had fascinating presentations from 2 young companies, even if Sonaka is not necessarily a young company, but Sonaka Aircraft, I understand, is a young company, and Elixir on new ways of designing aircraft, modern aircraft. We also had discussions on electrical propulsion, which was, I think, for a lot of people, one of the potential solutions for the future. When it will come, that's something that we will need to discuss. We also discussed about some technologies this morning when we discussed about sharing the airspace. I'd like to say, if I may, as a moderator, can I express my opinion on something? When you think about it, we in aviation, I'm a pilot myself, we exchange safety-critical information with air traffic controllers through a very modern technology, which is called VHF radio. Do you know when VHF radio was invented? Huh? When was it invented? VHF. Julian, you know, I'm sure. So, it was invented before the Second World War. We are still today exchanging safety-critical information through very, very modern technology which was developed almost 1 century ago. Okay? So, I think, and that's my contribution to the debate, it's a humble opinion. Maybe before we implement full electric aircraft, urban mobility, and so on and so forth, maybe it would be good to have data communication between all aircraft and the ground, between aircraft to aircraft. Maybe that could be something which is achievable not in 2030, but let's hope in the next years. Yeah? It could be a conclusion of the conference, but I'll come back to that later on. I don't want to influence. So, as I said, policymakers, they will all make statements, presentations on how they see the future, what is important for them, what needs to be done from their perspective on general aviation. We will open up for Slido questions afterwards to see how you see things and what are the burning issues that maybe we did not address or that we should address more in detail. And I hope it will be a very interactive and interesting session. I'm not going to read the long CVs that I received for all of you, but I'm going to introduce all our speakers here briefly. starting with Elisabeth, who has started to work in aviation with the Vienna airport, right? I won't say in which year, but you started some time ago. 10 years ago, you were the managing director of the city airport train that a lot of us will take to go back to the airport, which is running well, I think, so congratulations for that. And now you are the Director General of Civil Aviation for Austria and Deputy Director General for Transport. Yes. Filip Cornelis is the Director for Aviation of DG Move. I learned things when I looked at your CV, that you joined the Commission working on accession of the 12 new EU member states, where you were leading the team drafting the treaties for accession for the 12 EU member states. And you decided to join the really interesting part of the Commission, which is transport, in 2006. And then you were appointed, when were you appointed? 2010. As a head of unit and director for aviation last year. Okay. The third speaker is Patrick Cipriani, who also has been working in aviation for a certain number of years in the development of air traffic management systems first, then joining a private consulting company. He was my boss, by the way, in this company, so I know him quite well. And then coming back to the DGAC, where he's now the director of the Aviation Supervisory Authority, DGAC, since 2014, I think. And last but not least, Mark Swan, who, and that's also a surprise to me, I didn't know that you were a lawyer. And I felt sorry to see that. Okay, sorry for the lawyers. No, but Mark is a fighter pilot. You flew Phantom and Tornado fighters until 1993. Then you commanded the Tornado Squadron and the first RAF Typhoon base. You were appointed the Director of Airspace Policy in February 2009, and now you are the Group Director for Airspace Policy and Safety Regulation in the UK CAA. And interestingly, Mark is a Spitfire and Hurricane display pilot with over 3,500 flying hours, of which over 3,000 hours were with operational military fighters. Okay, so you are forgiven for being a lawyer, I think. So, without further ado, I give the floor to Elisabeth.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I think I need my little... Yeah. So the question was, what is about vision for general aviation? When we speak about that, we have to look into the future. I think the basis are now 2 days of very, very interesting and impressive discussions, panel discussions, contributions, questions, and partially answers to that. But I think some of the answers are still open, and we have to think about the vision. So one of the very important and pressing items from my point of view is all which is concerned with shared airspace. We all know that the pressure is really on, that the system, the capacity constraints are in the air, and that new entrants have already entered the airspace or will enter the airspace. And we have heard that pressure for general aviation will be much more in the future too. So what can be done or should be done when we speak about a vision and when we speak about the next steps? We could speak about easier instrument flight access to uncontrolled airspace. We could speak about adopt airspace structures to fit for general aviation and reduce infringements. We could speak about establishing European-wide standards for data transfer protocols, for example, for meteorological issues. Of course, we could speak about promotion of IFR approaches to small airports, just to take away pressure from the big ones. We could speak about establishing operational benefits from new collision warning systems or from new technologies, of course. From my point of view, the most important step would be to create platforms to support cooperation between airspace providers. We have heard that there might be and there are different needs for them, and that it's most essential to bring them around one table to talk about what needs are there now and what needs might be there in future, and to do that in a very, very proactive way. If I might formulate a wish, I would wish to EASA just to be there in the lead once more, just to arrange a platform where this can be possible, where all the stakeholders or the airspace users, might be civil, might be military, might be commercial, or might be general aviation, where that might be possible. As a second step, from my point of view, it is really important that general aviation opens its doors, not only for young men, surprisingly, also for young women or for women. So I think it's really important to look where are the stakeholders, where are people who might be interested in aviation. I think there are many possibilities to step in. I think it is very important to show how attractive this field is, not only thinking about pilots which we might need and which we will need in future, not only in general aviation but also in commercial aviation. But we need them urgently in all other fields, might be maintenance facilities, might be the engineering companies, might be manufacturers. So it is our task, it's not only the regulatory task, but especially your task as stakeholders, as a community, to open the doors and to think about new possibilities to address other people who might find aviation attractive and interesting. Yesterday it was mentioned that we also, when we speak about general aviation, we also speak about small and medium general aviation organizations. They really have an important function for the aviation system and have a relevant economic factor. Just a number for Austria, we have roughly 300 general aviation businesses in Austria. Of course, there are very, very small ones and bigger ones. But seeing that shows that there are many and there are needs from their side. And I think it is very important that they find a common approach, that they find a shared platform for themselves and have a voice for them, for their purposes and for their needs, and to take their needs into consideration. We have seen very, very impressive steps when it comes to technologies and innovations. It was important not only to see innovations in the manufacturing field, but also when it comes to communication, for example, when it comes to new business models. So innovation is done within the aviation system, but also outside, and it's just coming into the system from outside. So once again, I think it is very important to leave the doors open for all kinds of innovations, to look for best practices, not only in the aviation field, but also in the other industries. Not only look on national basis, but also look cross-border, and look on a European level what might be in the pipeline. Of course, what can the regulator do? I think most of it has already been started very effectively. It is about defining proportionate and flexible certification processes or rules for the community to make things happen, to make things probable and possible. And I think the most important factor for that is to not to be acting in a proactive way. And I think that regulatory authorities have just stepped in the last years and have made much progress in this regard. And we should really go on in that direction. Last but not least, I personally think, especially when we speak about the general aviation community, safety promotion is the key glue element for all of our issues. We have a very, very diverse community, and some of the stakeholders, some of the airspace users, some of the aviators are not doing it as a regular job, but just do it on for example, only in summer month or so. So they don't have the practice from day to day. So I think it's very, very important to simplify not only the rules, but also to promote safety issues in a very reduced, simple way, and also again, open the doors for the new ways of communication. We all use, of course, leaflets, we'll use websites. Website of EASA was very, very welcome. And I think the new generations want to use other channels too, so we have to think about that too. So my personal opinion is that we should finish and go on with our General Aviation Roadmap 1.0, but evolve it to General Aviation Roadmap 2.0, just taking on board the issues of sharing, how to share airspace effectively, how to attract young aviators, what to do with the issues, and how can we support small and medium businesses in Europe, how can we make sure that innovation and technology can take place, and last but not least, safety promotion is really the supporting element in all these issues when it comes to vision. Thank you very much.
So also a very good afternoon from my side. I would like to, picking up on what Patrick said about my background, indeed, I joined the transport area very recently in 2006, and then I only found where was the really important part, the aviation part, in 2010. And then I erred for another 2 years in an area that was the wrong one, which is aviation security, and only found my way to safety in 2012. And why do I mention that? Because 2012 was also the time when the GA roadmap, the first one, was really the topic of the day. And in a way, I came to aviation on that wave of discussions we had at the time. And I was very proud and afterwards happy that I was able to contribute to that work at the time in my very humble way at the time, because the real people we need to thank for the work, and it was mentioned already before, is Patrick, and in this case it's the two Patricks, both Patrick Key and Patrick Cipriani, who have been leading that effort from the start in 2012. We certainly consider that it has been a good journey. I can see that in this room, for example, the atmosphere is very different from the kind of atmosphere we had in events in 2012. And that shows that we have been able together to change the way that we approach regulation. It is clear and it is recognized today that general aviation is not only a respectable pastime, but it is also a source of innovation. It is a source of new pilots and mechanics coming to the aviation sector, and that is a wider contribution of GA to the aviation industry. So we consider now that this is an area where we have a constructive relationship with stakeholders, an area where also we can learn new approaches. And the whole approach of performance-based regulation, the concept even of the risk hierarchy, which are two concepts that have now been included in the EASA basic regulation, basically found their roots in the work we did on the GA roadmap a couple of years earlier. So we learned from GA, and now we are, in a way, passing back the challenge, because we have now that basic regulation in place. we are starting to use it and testing some of those concepts as we have been doing recently on the new drones regulation, which we have tried to build in a way that is operations-based, that is performance-based. We've learned a lot, we've had our challenges, and we are still discussing this with our lawyers, among others, but also with member states and the industry in order to get a good outcome. But it is working. More generally, the performance-based approach, the risk hierarchy, it is also an opportunity for you as a GA community to make use of those new possibilities which exist. And I am referring in particular to the possibility in the new basic regulation to take more responsibility for your own fate and to take over some of the authority tasks, or what we considered in the past to be pure authority tasks, similar to what has been done in past years with microlights in some states, is now enabled also in other parts of the industry, thanks to the new basic regulation. And it is for you as a GA community to take up that possibility, for example, with qualified entities. At the same time, it's clear that even if we have toned down the level of regulation, we still have, as regulator, a task to regulate, at least to maintain the system that we have in place. First of all, it means completing the existing roadmap. We have a promise to you there, and I know that Jirki yesterday presented the state of affairs and made very firm promises in this regard, which I hope we will be able to deliver with the help of EASA. But also more generally, I wanted to say that we have a responsibility to do maintenance of the regulation, but we also have limited means at our disposal. And despite the Commission's reputation as being a very large organization, we actually have a rather small team working on aviation affairs, and even smaller on aviation safety affairs. So I'm aware that we had over a past period what could be called a backlog, or EASA was running faster than we were able to run behind or in front. And we are dealing with that situation with new people and new approaches in order to catch up. So that is also my personal pledge to you. But it does mean that we will need also in the future to prioritize work. And I know there's a very long to-do list or a very long wish list, and we have worked together with your associations and with EASA to see where are the priorities, where do you have the biggest gains with the lowest cost in the short term. So let's continue to do that. And to focus not on the means but on the goals. So what are the main goals from our perspective? Well, first of all, of course, safety. Typically we start every speech by saying safety is the most important thing. But everybody in this room knows that, so I didn't need to start with that. Still, we need to keep it in mind. And the question came up earlier today on what is acceptable level of safety. And here I wanted to throw in a comment. If you ask a politician like my commissioner, what should be the level of, how many fatalities can we accept, and you as the regulator, of course the answer will be 0. It is normal. But what we are talking about here is not to tell the Commission that she is responsible personally for everything that goes wrong. We are talking here about giving responsibility also to the community, to the sector, and to the users. And this is the philosophy of the risk hierarchy that we have in the regulation. And then it becomes acceptable that certain risks exist, which we all take, even those of us who are not pilots. I'm probably the only one in this room. But we do horse riding, we do cycling, we do all kinds of things that have certain risks, and this is accepted. Just don't ask a politician what should be the appropriate level, but we should put in place the regulation that gives you that responsibility to take care of your own safety. It is different when we're talking about passengers in a commercial airplane. It also has to do with the freedom that you are looking for. and freedom means taking responsibility. It also means making choices, because the more you want in terms of freedom, for example, to fly everywhere, the more, of course, you will also need to take into account other airspace users, and there will be requirements, including technical requirements that have a certain cost and restrictions that you then need to take into account. So there again, it is a question for you to take the level of responsibility that you wish to take. One point about innovation, I mentioned it already, that I believe and we believe that GA can help us to innovate aviation. There are many bright ideas, and we heard some today. We all know that not all of them will succeed, but what we want to do as a regulator is to make it possible to create an environment in which this innovation can take place. And that goes back again to this performance-based approach. When I came to aviation, I had sometimes the impression that aviation regulation was really started off by the people early in the industry who basically converted their manual, their ops manual and their production specs into a law. And this, of course, then was not technology neutral. And we have now a big job to change that approach, and we are doing that, and work in a way that is similar to the way we regulate other sectors of the economy, and give the space for that innovation that I know you want to have. We all know it exists, and we want you to be able to use it. And Patrick very clearly gave the most blatant example, which is the communication technology that is still the basic means around, when we all know that there are many other options in place. So to conclude, what from our perspective, or from my perspective, could be taken on board or should be taken into account in the future, once we are completing the existing roadmap, if we are looking for new goals for the future. What I see on my radar, at least, is, I would say, first of all, that question of technology, the need for us to make it possible to embark more technology, and I can tell you that we are working very hard now in the general sphere of ATM and air navigation, which is probably one of the most difficult areas to make evolve. We're working very hard to try to push through a new dynamic in our single sky, including the technological aspects, to get real innovation, because it has to be a collective, coordinated approach. Nobody can do it on his own. So that's one challenge that I see. A second one, I would say, is related to navigation in the lower airspace. We see that there will be, potentially in future, many more users, very different kinds of users of airspace. That is also very important for you. And we need to make space for that, make sure that everybody can use that airspace in a safe way. And clearly this will be, for me, an area where those new ideas, new technologies of automation will find their first practical application, and can then hopefully migrate throughout the aviation system. There's one very specific point that came up also today, which is the question of operating licenses. We are going to probably revise or review the Air Services Regulation, Regulation 1008 of 2008, which imposes operating license. We have already made changes to AOC, the scope of AOCs, with EASA, but there is now an inconsistency with the operating license rules, and we will have to look at that in order to avoid very burdensome requirements on some of those new business models that are out there. And my last point is related to the whole question of applying performance-based approach in practice. I think we learned some important lessons from the drones discussion. Wanting to have an operations-based approach, we need to find a balance between the freedom and the simplicity. We see that there is a risk if you have a total freedom, but then there is a requirement to do a safety assessment for every single operation. and define mitigation measures for every single operation was found then not to be a very practical approach, and also hit some legal obstacles, because our lawyers for good reason say you cannot write a law that is very general where the citizen or the user cannot be sure what exactly he needs to do to be compliant with the law. So we need to learn from this experience and find the right balance between freedom and simplicity. And in that context also we will need to think further about the question of the acceptable level of safety. So with those ideas, I want to conclude only by saying that we definitely remain very much committed to the GA roadmap, the old one and the new one, from the Commission side, and we'll do whatever is in our power to push that train or that plane forward with the continued support of both EASA and the GA community. I'm convinced of that. Thank you very much.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here today. As Filip recalled, with some others in the room, I've been working in 2012 on launching this new approach to general aviation. And I'm very, very, very satisfied to see the way that has been undertaken and all the progress that has been made. Many things have been done. But I have to start with when we were asked by what was, in your views, the priorities for the next steps. My first priority for Roadmap 2.0 is to finalize Roadmap 1.0. I know all the work that has been done. We know it, all the people inside this room. But we have to realize that in the field, in the aero clubs, the aircraft owners, the pilots, many think they just don't have seen anything yet, even if there is a tremendous work that has been done in preparing new regulation. I'm talking about Part 21 for GA. I'm talking about Part M Light, all these which are meant to reduce costs. I'm talking about basic IR, because this is clearly facilitating the instrument ratings, which will lead to a better level of safety. And I'm talking also of modular LAPL, because this is a way to increase access to a wider community to general aviation. So as we all know, all this is in the pipe. The scheme that were shown by Jerky was very objective in saying most of it is green, some are yellow, and some are red. But be aware that in the fields, even the yellow is not seen at all. So my first point was, don't abandon the priority we need to have to finalize Roadmap 1.0. Now, a side comment on what has been said yesterday. In facilitating access and usage of GA, we may find some situations where it is felt useful and necessary to deviate from ICAO standards. I just wanted to point this aspect because, and it's maybe a message to my counterparts in the national authorities, I think in some specific cases where it has been correctly analyzed and where it is correctly managed, we should not be afraid of deviating if we feel it is the right way to go, deviating from ICAO standards, and notify, of course, because it is an obligation, that deviation. I'm not, of course, saying that this should be our goal, continually deviating, of course not, but in some specific cases, maybe we should do it, we can do it, and it's maybe also a way to pave the future for ICAO, which is by nature slower than what we can do in Europe. Now I want to go to my second priority, if you want, is make use of emerging technology. I won't recall all what has been done in the last 2 days, but we've seen very different time horizons. if I look at my first priority in France, it would be to facilitate the development of electric propulsion aircraft. This is the work that was mentioned. We are doing with EASA, with the French Aeronautic Federation, with the Swiss, and with the Pipistrel company. Why is it a priority? Because for us, one of the major threats to general aviation is its social acceptability with regard to noise problems. We have several airfields where the population around just has one struggle, is to make the airfield close. And the only way we have to alleviate the threat in front of us on a very short-term basis is the use of electric propulsion aircraft for initial training, maybe. And it is the action that we have launched, and we hope that in a very near future, a question of months, we will be capable together of converting pilots to electric flight and to train in a second phase, initial training pilots. There are some technologies already available. We need to facilitate and encourage the GNSS approaches on most of the terrains. In France, we have 80% of all the IFR airfields which are equipped now with GNSS approaches. What am I doing wrong? That's better? Yeah, okay. Thank you. So, facilitate development of GNSS approaches. We've been talking of some cockpit equipment. I will not talk about ADS-B as my English colleague is actively working on it, so he will mention it. The cell parachute, I take this opportunity to mention it because it was mentioned yesterday. It's the kind of existing technology that is already widely spread, but not necessarily well understood. I mean, it lacks usage doctrine, and maybe we should work on that also. We've seen all the interest of having cockpit aids for pilots, be it weather information processing, anti-collision, airspace warnings. All this exists already, often on a mobile devices. I think we need to encourage this. And as an authority, we need to accept and examine how these non-certified devices can be used widely, have to accept them, and maybe work on good practices to handle correctly the fallback situations where the device is not working anymore. So this will lead us to new ways of seeing things, not a two binary situation, all which is certified and all which is not, but how to use non-certified devices. We've seen more prospective things on electrical eVTOL. I'm convinced that many things can be done. It may become an alternative way for general aviation. We'll see. We've seen also all the challenges to be met. I think we enter that in a new era. We've seen this morning that we don't know exactly what will be the place of the pilot. If the business model is to be confirmed, the idea is to have the general public using these kind of machines with a lot of automation. The question will be, what are we expecting from the person in command, in particular when we are, of course, in degraded situations. We've been talking also of flying passengers, paying passengers, flying taxis. I won't say anything about that because for me, this is clearly not general aviation. This is typically similar to commercial air transport in terms of level of safety which is expected. in terms of safety, this will be my third point, what should we aim at? Let me take the example of my country, in France. In GA, we have about 30 to 60 fatalities per year in the GA activity, comprising everything, including microlights. This is in tendency improving, but of course it is something that we need to continue to improve, although there is no public pressure on that, no political pressure either. So if we look at the causes, we found that the human factor is the main one. So this would be my priority in terms of looking at safety. Technology can help, but I think that we have another point on human factors, and safety promotion here is paramount. In general aviation, it is clear that regulation is not the best answer, in particular to all situations where the problem relies in situation awareness by the pilot. We have to put emphasis on training, and the federations can have a large role in that. And we have also to think on maintaining a high standard of competencies for instructors. So I think this, I'm not going to say that it should be done in a way or another. We've been in France led to enforce by national regulations some requirements for microlight instructors. It might be not the only way to do it, but we have to be very much concerned on the level of competencies of our instructors. This morning was mentioned how new business models could facilitate and enhance the general aviation activities. I was very, very satisfied to see how the distinction was made, and particularly by the representative of the platforms, between the cost-sharing activity, which is a GA activity, and what is or could have become a commercial air transport activity. And I think we have to bear this in mind constantly. I recall you the few elements that led us to convince that general aviation merited a different treatment than commercial air transport. The control of risk between, on one side, the pilot and the involved passenger, on the other side, a passenger which is a consumer, who has a contract, commercial contract, expecting to be transported from A to B at given conditions of time, of comfort, and of safety. The level of safety. The order of magnitude in general aviation is 10-5. The order of magnitude in commercial air transport is between 10-7 and 10-8. The acceptability, as we said, 10-5, some even dozens of casualties per year in general aviation is accepted. So I'm not having asked my politicians if they would accept it or not, but it is accepted by the public, by the media, because considered as like a sports activity. Whereas, as you well know, one single accident in commercial air transport is a national drama, which is considered by everyone as totally unacceptable. And the last difference is the concept of level playing field. Commercial air transport, we need regulation to prevent dangerously reducing costs due to commercial pressure. We don't have the same problem in general aviation. So we have to keep all this in mind in the way we see the regulation of general aviation, be it with current aircraft or with future aircraft. I will finish my speech in saying in very general terms that we have, as an authority, to be prepared to identify and accompany any new technology. We do not know will happen tomorrow. So we cannot be in advance to technology. That is impossible. But we have to be with the new developments and to have a step-by-step basis, as we do it for the electric aircraft. Experiment, step-by-step, authorize on a case-by-case basis, on a flexibility provision, derogation basis, waiting for the regulation in itself to be adapted. This is what I wanted to say to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Last one of the day, so hang on to your seats. I shall try and be slightly provocative. I had a presentation, I tore that up ages ago, because the conference has been so exciting with so many insights. I thought I'd try and give a kind of few takeaways on a recap and then open it up and stimulate some debate. What were my 3 takeaways, Patrick, from this excellent conference and some wonderful insights? Number 1, this for general aviation, you must become part of an integrated aviation system or you will not prosper. Part of an integrated aviation system. If not, the safari parks will have lions, tigers, elephants, old GA aircraft, and dare I say, old GA pilots. Point number 1. The second point for the regulators, we must begin to be able to develop integrated risk models of oversight and manage that oversight in a fast, effective, and safe way. What do I mean by that? We heard today data quality, systems reliability, resilience of airborne communications, and the integrity of passing data between air-to-air and air-to-ground. The associated training and everything that goes with that will become an essential feature of the integrated aviation system of the future. And the future, by the way, is tomorrow morning. And the third point for all of us, and I think the most important point I have taken away, and it's a live issue, is we all have to change our mindsets, our culture, our cultural approach. Advice for the general aviators on airspace. We saw it today, we saw it yesterday. The mindset that you are yielding airspace, that you lose airspace. For the NSP, that they win airspace to give more controlled airspace to one particular community. For the regulator, stuck in the middle of that fantastically enjoyable debate, not. We provide the safe solution. We never satisfy everybody and sometimes nobody, apart from the perceived winner. But the GA pilot only has to make one radio call and nothing has really changed, right? Wrong. So the regulator also has to change that mindset to airspace management from winners and losers and some rough equilibrium set out on a piece of paper that in practical terms doesn't work for the GA pilot, but we think it's good enough. So mindsets need to change to how do we all best share this very scarce commodity that we call airspace, that different people exploit for different reasons. And by the way, I was struck by the dream of humanity to fly from many millions of years ago. And the parallel struck me. It's actually quite useful that we were taught to share many, many millions of years ago. It's a natural instinct because otherwise we would all have died. So maybe sharing's a pretty good basic mindset to restart the clock on what the future brings for general aviation in particular. So those were the kind of 3 takeaways from today. The other one that struck me, and bear with me on this one, it leads into the new entrants in the drone debate, is if I can use the example of my dear mother, who is 84 years old, she drives a car that is faster by many, many miles an hour and more capable with the equipment it has on board than the top racing driver in any one of your countries 100 years ago. She doesn't have that racing driver's skills, but she can drive faster than him because it was a him. She has more effective equipment, and she has that capability. How did my mother become more expert than the top racing driver in any of your countries? Because technology let her. She doesn't actually wish to drive her very fast and very capable car. She would rather it drove itself. Because at the age of 80 plus, she would rather sit in her car and let the car do everything for her. Her use of the car is simply to get from A to B. In fact, she would much rather a drone delivered her shopping into her back garden, so she didn't even need a car at all. She'd skip that one, thank you very much. Just give me the drone. That makes my life easy. What point am I leading to in all of that? The new entrants are coming. They are here. They will destroy you if you do not adapt. They will constrain you to the dinosaur park simply because what you do and what you offer is a niche part of society. It is not a society global benefit, global wish, which some of the new entrants are bringing into that market that needs our airspace, and they don't care. So technology, as we've seen, is going to exploit airspace in a different way to that which we all currently envisage, but we have had some wonderful insights into that future now. And I have got some slides on ADSB. You can look at them. I'm sure they'll be put out later. So my final message is this. The future is as early as tomorrow. The future for general aviation is in the grasp of the people in this room. If you do not reach out and grasp it, the future will not be yours. That's it.
So, thank you very much. Quite provocative statements, huh, Mark? Can we have a look at the Slido questions? So, should we have a quota for the persons who ask questions? Because Julian Scarf is a bit too vocal, I think. No. Over the last 2 years, many important rule changes have stalled at DG Move. How will DG Move show us it is still truly committed to simpler, better, lighter rules? I guess that's for you, Filip. Can take it.
I think Julian not only is a keen Twitter, if we can call this a form of tweeting, but he also has a WhatsApp group and has instructed other people to vote for his question. No, I mean, the simple answer to that is that, as I tried to already mention in my statement before, is that there's no lack of commitment on our side. There is a lack of resources. And there is a question of legal drafting, and those are two issues that have been with us for years that we struggle with as a public administration, so to speak. But we are catching up on that backlog that had built up. We also had a little backlog caused by the switch from the old basic regulation to the new basic regulation. And had to put a few things on hold because of that. So my pledge is to continue to do our best, and including the finishing of the existing roadmap agenda.
I have to say that from our side, so we worked with Filip's team on the backlog. There was something like nearly 30 opinions in the backlog. Not all of them for General Aviation, so it's not. We have regrouped them, we have prioritized, and I think that by middle of next year, we will have gone through the entire backlog. So I wanted to thank you for this. We are not there yet, but I think there is a real willingness to go through it. Then it goes also to the member states, which is interesting because there is the commission services which are doing a certain number of things, but then those rules are also discussed with the member states. So we need to continue to put pressure also on the member states to adopt the rules at a fast pace. Is there anything specific planned for light sport aircrafts in GA Roadmap 2.0? Who wants to answer that? Dominique? Can we have a mic for Dominique?
Well, there is no something specific for light sport aircraft in GA Roadmap 2.0. There is something which is going beyond light sport aircraft, which is a review and a revision, a new approach for Part 21, what we call Part 21 proportionality, and that will try to reduce the cliff effect, these difficulties that manufacturers were facing when moving from a national system, ultralight, less than 450 kilo, to an EASA certification system. And so we want to propose a kind of continuous approach and avoid this big step, and so simplify the certification process for this entry level. But this will impact more than the LSA category. It will go to CS23 Amendment 5, Level 1 and Level 2 airplanes. So yes, we are working on that, but we go beyond LSA.
Okay. And there are a couple of questions on computer-assisted flying. Does it require ground infrastructure which allows for curved approaches? And another one which we could put together, which is, do you consider a broad introduction of fly-by-wire in GA a sensible first step into computer-assisted flying? Is anyone willing to answer to this? Dominique, you want to answer that as well?
Well, we are working harder to promote already in the context of our current aircraft to promote the concept of GNSS approach, where and it was mentioned by Patrick Cipriani, France is doing very well in this domain when 80% of the IFR airfield are already equipped with a GNSS or RNAV or LPV approach. This is really the way that we want to promote, and then there is no need. The beauty of the system that there is no need and no cost for infrastructure. The cost is only the design of the approach, and curved approach is possible when the avionics system will allow it. And yes, it's part of. We go even beyond when we want also to give the possibility to do IFR approach. Instrument approach on non-IFR airfield, and we have a task with our ops colleague currently going on, and we want to go into this direction. So.
Is the future of GA relying on no ground infrastructure, or put it the other way around? Is the ground infrastructure an obstacle or a barrier for the growth of GA? What do you think, Patrick?
I think that if we talk about NAVEDs, it's of the interest of GA to be able more and more to, thanks to GNSS approaches, not to need them anymore. It's a little bit more complex today because IFR approaches mean some ground items. I'm thinking of lightning, for example. So we are not in a position to have GNSS approaches on just an empty field, if I might say so. And to answer the question on curved approaches, the idea for GA with GNSS is to improve safety and to improve trajectory precision. If we are talking about curved approaches, this is a much demanding aspect, which is currently possible in commercial air transport, but with very high requirements. And this is not what I was thinking of when I was talking for General Aviation.
Yeah, just on that broader question, Patrick, of ground infrastructure, and my slides talked about ADSB as the integrator. I think, and they'll go out with the pack, no doubt. In terms of the broader ground infrastructure, a future of integration with drones enabled by something like ADS-B plus all of the other equipment that can integrate into that sort of ground system paves the way, sets the conditions for success for all of these other things that people wish. Because when you know who is around you and you have that integrated surveillance traffic information inside your cockpit without talking to an air traffic control person, so you have a safe environment, the ability to grow these capabilities will increase exponentially, because the capabilities required by the people in this room will be able to be integrated with the other requirements of the new entrants, space rockets as well. And this infrastructure, I think in terms of the future roadmap, the theme of the future roadmap should be how best to integrate all players in the field, how best to integrate. Because if we get that right, then we're talking a new ball game.
But isn't it a theme which is broader than just GA?
Yes.
It's a theme for the entire aviation, how to be able to integrate all aviation actors.
Absolutely, much broader than GA, but the GA roadmap needs to set out its vision for that integrating factor, which is the point I was trying to make earlier.
If I may, I have a question which is not in the slide, but which is coming from some of the discussions I had during the coffee breaks. We are all going to try to work on performance-based rules, and it was mentioned by you, Filip, in particular. Now the question is, do performance-based rules, risk-based oversight, how does that apply to GA or not? Because in a number of instances, in fact, some actors prefer to have prescriptive rules that are easy to understand and implement, rather than performance-based, which require a certain level of maturity in understanding what is behind the rule. What do you think, Mark?
So I think there's always a mix. There has to be, because you regulate the lowest safe common denominator, and some of that regulation will always be prescriptive, because it produces the best and the safest outcomes. If you look as a live example, the Air Publication 1391, which is about the certification of chipsets for ADS-B, we set a performance standard for the chipset and a performance standard for the safety impact level, and provided you meet those performance standards, that's all you have to do. Buying the equipment, fitting it at no cost, no regulatory impact, you can just have it on board, is a good risk-based approach based on a performance standard. And then the pilots need the training and the capability to absorb that into their cockpit management. It's a slightly different issue, but it's still there. So some of it will still be prescriptive. You have to have this amount of flying hours and these capabilities in order to achieve your flight from A to B. But a mix of performance and prescriptive, I think, is for general aviation in particular, is a very appropriate mix.
Mm-hmm. Elisabeth.
Is it on? Yeah. I would strongly vote for prescriptive, simple rules. I think that would be a way, and just accompanied by safety promotion. From my point of view, it's very important that it is that they understood correctly, that it's a simple way to transport what is the relevant safety aspect of it, and that pack it into prescriptive rules. And combine it with safety promotion. I say it once more because to my mind it's really very important, based on facts, based on figures. We have talked about this the last 2 days again, that this is very important to have valid data where to base, for example, safety promotion for the community.
Mm-hmm. Patrick?
I wanted to add that for me, performance based oversight or regulation is clearly linked to safety maturity of the organizations. And maybe in general aviation, we could envisage some things with organized elements like federations, users federations, on a more performance-based, which is much more easier probably than to have this kind of concept with individual pilots or air clubs.
Filip, you wanted to add something?
Well, it's a bit the point I was trying not very eloquently to make earlier on about the trade-off between freedom and self-responsibility and simplicity. And if there can be simplicity in rules, in that you have a manual, you follow it, and you're fine. If you have total freedom and you have to demonstrate each time that you are operating safely, it can be at the end quite burdensome. That's what we learned in the drones discussion, where we ended up developing some standard scenarios at the end of the day. And there's also a problem of legal drafting associated with that, because we cannot make laws that are too general and where, as a citizen, you cannot be sure of when you are meeting the requirements. So there we still have a challenge to find that right balance and the way of presenting that in rules. And this is really, it's something we need to do, because we have no other choice. With a community like drones, we have no other choice than going down that way, and the GA community will benefit from that work that is still ahead of us. But it's a bit of a struggle for a regulator still. The concept is easy, but then how to apply it is not always easy.
Okay. May I say something to that? I'm very heavily involved in F-44. And we are writing performance-based standards, but we do both. Some of the players want performance-based rules because they have the capability, big manufacturers, of working those. But some of the smaller ones, they have not. And they tell me what you must do. And then I do it. So we try to make a mix. And I think there's always room for a mix and satisfy both.
I fully agree. And performance-based rules are not the panacea for everything. And sometimes you need to be prescriptive. And other times it's better to be performance-based. And it has to deal with the maturity as well of the stakeholders to which the rules will apply. And I think that's a fair statement. I saw someone wanted to ask a question in the back there. Can we get a mic to this person, please?
Thank you. Sorry, me again. I was the one who was asking this question about curved approaches. The point was not really whether we need ground equipment or infrastructure, space infrastructure, some other infrastructure. The point was that if you are doing curved approach in manned aviation, we heard the requirements are very high. When you have nobody on board, then the requirement should be even higher, I suppose. And that was the basic question which I had. Do you see, for example, introducing these curved approaches based on, say, GPS as a first step? We were talking about step-by-step introduction of technology. As a first step in general aviation, to use that as a technology which we then roll out to the future technologies. That second question was addressing the same thing, because fly-by-wire is the next thing you need if you have no pilot on board. So, do you see a good chance to put this technology on a broad scale into general aviation as a step before you go autonomous?
Well,
I think that's nothing we have to decide on. I think it will develop on itself. Companies will decide where to go. Big companies have money and will decide where to go and where to experiment. Small companies will have startups and try it. I think it's not a thing we decide if it's a field in the general aviation or we started in the commercial. Sorry? But I think safety is always the matter if it is an issue, if it is manned or unmanned. So we will have to decide if it is safe enough for all the passengers being there. So I think that's not the difference from my perspective.
So the steps towards automation is another subject for another conference, I think. It's a very complicated story. I don't think there is one unique path to do it. It's not because you can do a curved approach that you can automate and so on and so forth. There are other ways. And I agree with Elisabeth. It's up to the industry to propose some different paths towards full automation. I think that digitalization will be one of the obligatory steps at some stage. Now, what it enables to do and to perform as a service is another story. But step-by-step approach, definitely, little by little, ensuring that the safety level is at least the same. And then what are the first steps, the second steps, and so on and so forth, it's up to you to decide, and us to validate. I agree with you. So I see that the time is running. So what I would like to propose now, to wrap up, is that each of the panel members would give us their number one priority for the next GA roadmap. And I'm going to start in the opposite way from the presentation. So starting with Mark.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. My one priority would be to use EASA to the greatest extent possible in coordinating all of these things we have seen going on in not only national aviation authorities, each member state, but the big industrial companies that reach across member states. The EASA has that safety coordination function to pull together all these fabulous initiatives and get that into a roadmap that we all sign up to. I think that's a key function for you, Patrick, over the next few years.
My name is Patrick Key anyway, so everything is key for me. Patrick.
Well, if I have to choose only one, I will choose the electric propulsion aircraft, because, as I said, this is a major improvement, a breakthrough that we need, and that is just in front of us. So I will have this priority for all of us, the agency, the member states, so that it is in a very short future the way that our pilots are trained in our airfields.
Okay. Filip?
Well, I will do one and a half, if I may. First of all, to agree with Patrick on the importance of sustainability issues, whether it's noise or emissions, and how it's done. There are many issues to be done, but I can see that sustainability is rising as an issue in the political agenda for aviation in general. But the main point I would make is really this big challenge that we have ahead of us in the modernization of air navigation, which affects all the players in the who are using airspace, and it can only happen if everybody is working on it together, and everybody needs to embark the necessary technologies. I know that for you it's very important that it's affordable, but it has to be done in a coordinated way so that we have a new CNS in place to deliver that capacity in the airspace that will be needed, both for the growth of traffic and for the emergence of all those new players, particularly in that airspace that you use the most.
Elisabeth?
For me, it's innovation. Leave the door open for innovation for the future, and with special priority also for sharing airspace.
Okay. Can you join me in giving a round of applause for this panel? Thank you very much.